Over the past decade or so, Gerard Butler has established himself as something of an action star, and while I think his acting skills are certainly acceptable for the type of movies that he appears in, most of his more recent films can best be described as rather forgettable fare. That's not to say that Butler's movies are unwatchable or anything, but to me, they often seem like they're just serviceable enough. And if there was ever a perfect example for this, it would be Butler's 2018 action heist movie, Den of Thieves, about an unconventional cop that tries to catch a gang of bank robbers in Los Angeles. Clearly influenced by the movie Heat, Den of Thieves didn't exactly reinvent the wheel when it came out. In addition, its screenplay also had too many plot conveniences and required too much suspension of disbelief. Still, Den of Thieves at least boasted a solid ensemble cast in addition to Butler, which included Pablo Schreiber, 50 Cent, and O'Shea Jackson Jr., who's Ice Cube's real-life son, and yes, he absolutely looks like him. And for a gritty crime film with a $30 million budget, I think Den of Thieves was made rather efficiently, which is why the movie didn't lose money at the box office during its theatrical run, and then later even found a larger audience on various different streaming services. While I myself was somewhat okay with the first Den of Thieves movie, I really didn't see a compelling enough reason to extend the story into a sequel. And honestly, I'm not sure that Den of Thieves writer-director Christian Gudegast was always thinking of a sequel either, as the 2018 movie concludes in a rather satisfactory way, which means that making Den of Thieves 2 Pantera was always going to be a real challenge. Still, as a reviewer and a fan of action movies, I was more than willing to give Den of Thieves 2 Pantera a chance, hoping it would offer enough enjoyable moments to help conceal its potential flaws, because even with a more flimsy screenplay, well-executed action movies featuring exciting set pieces and intriguing characters can still be engaging if done right within this genre. But before we take a deep dive into Den of Thieves 2, please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel, which in case you were wondering, is not AI narrated, as I'm a real movie critic that actually narrates his own videos. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera continues where the first movie leaves off, with Gerard Butler now tracking Ice Cube Jr., who's in Europe working on some new heist. A lot has seemingly gone wrong for Butler's character since the first movie, which has left him with financial problems, employment issues, and a messy divorce. But for some reason, amidst all of his personal issues, Gerard Butler seems laser focused on flying to France, where he believes Ice Cube Jr. is secretly setting up shop. And what do you know? It turns out that Ice Cube really is in France, setting up shop with a new crew to take on his biggest heist yet. And even though Gerard Butler doesn't have the jurisdiction to arrest an American criminal in France, he miraculously pulls some strings to connect him with local French police who agree to help him find his suspect. But as Butler gets closer to finding him, he starts to have second thoughts about his career as a cop, thinking that maybe it's about time that he too was paid for all of his troubles. And so suddenly, Butler finds himself seemingly aligned with Ice Cube Jr. But will this new alliance between Butler, Cube, and the other crew members last as they work on pulling off one of the biggest heists of all time? As much as I wanted to like Den of Thieves 2, Pantera, I simply can't ignore how many issues this movie has. For starters, I think the screenplay here is extremely poor, even for a very average, by-the-book action movie. Nothing that Gerard Butler's character does in this movie makes any logical sense to begin with, but the fact that he keeps flip-flopping throughout the movie makes the poor writing of his character look even worse. Writer-director Christian Gudegast just wasn't sure what to do with him, so he keeps changing his motivations when the plot requires it. It's kind of a shame because I do think there was a much better way to show his dilemma as a cop down on his luck. Had the first act of the movie actually showed us more about just how terrible Butler's personal life had become, then, when he had started questioning what he was willing to do to turn his own life around, it would have appeared much more believable. Instead, everything Butler does just feels random and out of left field, and with almost no writing buildup whatsoever. And it's not like the movie properly handles Ice Cube Jr.'s character either, and even after 2 movies, we don't really know enough about his character to really care what he does one way or another. I suppose that's why in the middle of the movie, there's this very long and awkward scene in which Butler and Cube sit around and talk about their childhood for no apparent reason, but you know what? It feels forced and it doesn't really work, and this certainly isn't helped by Gerard Butler and Ice Cube Jr.'s lack of on-screen chemistry together. It may not have been noticeable during the first Den of Thieves because that one had a much stronger ensemble cast, but here, it's really hard to ignore because the movie really relies on both of these actors. And specifically, I think the reason Butler and Cube Jr. don't work very very well together is that both of them have a very similar type of cynical and reserved vibe, completely failing to balance each other out. In contrast, the more successful Fast and Furious heist films were fun to watch thanks in part to the charm and likability of Paul Walker, juxtaposed against Vin Diesel's more grumpy bravado, and occasionally supported by more comical crew members like Tyrese Gibson and Ludacris. In Den of Thieves 2, the attempt to create a similar crew dynamic really falls flat. The supporting characters here are so generic that I barely remember them even though I've just seen this movie. And much like with Butler and Cube Jr., the motives of the secondary characters are usually pretty unclear, with actions seeming arbitrary and without any type of storytelling consistency. Twists and turns are a good tool to incorporate into a screenplay, but they should actually be properly set up and paid off in a way that actually advances the narrative. In Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, the twists and turns are just so random that they mainly end up disrupting the story's entire flow. This is especially noticeable in the movie's third act, and it's not like the action scenes here compensate for the weak screenplay either. Even the first Den of Thieves movie, with all of its flaws, was able to give us some decent action that kept us engaged. This movie is just super slow in its pacing, and even once something happens, it's mostly dumb, and at times, even boring. So much so that I was genuinely shocked at its very lengthy 2-hour and 24-minute runtime, which is in no way justified. And finally, even the movie's overly eclectic score doesn't do it any favors, as rather than help build some suspense when needed, it just adds to the overall lackluster feel of the movie. At the end of the day, Den of Thieves 2 feels more like a direct-to-streaming Netflix movie, rather than a cinematic theatrical release, and considering that 6 years have passed since the release of the first Den of Thieves movie, I'm not entirely sure why it was even made. Ultimately, it's an unnecessary sequel failing to expand on anything we've seen in its predecessor. And while I don't dislike Gerard Butler as an actor, Den of Thieves 2 just doesn't work for me as an action heist movie, so if I had to give it a score, I would give it a 45 out of 100, which means that it's a failing grade. And just for comparison, in contrast, I would give the original Den of Thieves a 70 out of 100. But on the bright side, if you enjoy my honest and independent movie reviews, please make sure to like, subscribe, and follow, as it would really help my channel. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day.
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.